Hey guys, Danny with Danny Gus and Fitness podcast here with John Considine. John is my first mentor in life and still is a very important person to me.
And when you're about 8.
That's right. That's right. And John was my Hapkido instructor when I was 8 years old, and he's played an important role ever since. And one thing that John has taught me over the years, in particular the last several years of my life, that has made an extremely profound impact on my life is the idea of being in integrity with myself and being in integrity with others. And I think there's some misconceptions on integrity and what it is. We get into that into more depth here. We talk about understanding integrity and what it is, what it means to be integrity with others, what it means to be integrity with yourself. And one important thing is the role of boundaries, right? Because in order to maintain those integrities with yourself, with others, you also have to know how to create proper boundaries with yourself and with others. So John has a coaching practice, and John, I'd love if you would just tell a little bit more about that.
So I've been coaching for probably about 25 years. I was teaching Hapkido for a long time, but I also coached executives and athletes, and a number of different people. One of the things that I coach people around is around boundaries and around integrity. And I am going to be working on my international coaching certificate so I can work within the framework of corporations. And I'm going to be looking for people who are interested in coaching. And I'm going to be doing it at a really reduced rate. Anybody who wants to check it out, well, we'll get together for an hour and see what happens, see if we can work together or not. If you wanted to reach me, you can reach me by email, and it's my last name, Considine, CONSIDINEJR@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. John, thank you so much.
All right.
John,
Danny.
thank you for being here. I'm super excited about this.
Nice to see you. We'll see how it goes.
We'll see how it goes. That's what you said last time, and it went great. But we got a lot to get into today, so we'll get to it. So at least one of the important subjects for today is the idea of integrity or being in integrity. That is a concept. You've been a mentor of mine for a long time, and this is a concept that you've introduced to me more so in the last several years of my life, and it has been totally life-changing. And in the way that I conduct myself in my personal relationships, and the way that I conduct myself professionally, the peace that I experience with myself. And I think a lot of people have misconceptions about integrity, being in integrity, like you were saying earlier, just, I'm just going to keep my word or be true to myself or whatever. And those are elements of it, right? But there's so much more to it if you really want to experience the benefits that you can. So those are the things. So integrity is one thing we were going to get into, the idea of being in integrity with oneself, being in integrity with others. And you mentioned, as we were talking about this a little bit in advance, how it's hard to talk about being in integrity and living in integrity without setting proper healthy boundaries in your life too. Right? So I think the first important question is, for those watching, what is integrity?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I wouldn't start there.
Okay.
I would start with, what is character? And character is the values that we hold true, right? Like honesty, integrity, righteousness, courage, strength, caring, etc.
Yeah.
So identity is a little bit different, or integrity is a little bit different. So integrity is staying true to your own values, right? Doing the right thing, correct, but how do we stay true to our values and maintain that?
When you're talking about character, you're almost talking about, what comes up to me for me is almost like the opposite of like the 7 deadly sins, right? We know what those ugly traits are, right? But I think there's not enough talk about those positive traits, right? Like kindness, virtue, righteousness, truth, all those things, right?
And they don't happen in a day.
No, they don't happen in a day.
And it's something you cultivate and develop, like, working out, developing strength. It's
Mustard me. I
same
mean,
thing.
I was born with all of those virtues.
Of course.
Just ask everyone who knew me growing up.
I knew you. I knew you then. Right.
So one of the things that you mentioned is the difference between integrity with yourself and integrity with others.
Okay. So integrity with others is living up to your commitments, doing the right thing, saying what you're going to do and doing it. And when you do those things, I mean, everybody knows this at some level. What do you build? You build trust in that relationship and reliability. So in personal relationships, in our families with your spouses and girlfriends, girlfriend isn't going to marry you unless she can trust you.
At least you shouldn't.
She shouldn't, right? Some do. And so living your word, saying your truth, living your word is extraordinarily important, and sticking with it and be determined to do it. When I tell somebody I'm going to show up, usually they ask me, are you going to show up? I say, I will show up unless one of two things happen. And they go, what? If something's on fire or somebody's dying, then
An emergency.
An emergency, right? An emergency, unless there's a real emergency. And if there is a real emergency, I'll let you know. But other than that, I'm going to be here.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm like.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And when you're talking about the idea of being in integrity with yourself or with others, what is the distinction? You say that with other people, it's just keeping your word, right? It's about
keeping your word and your commitments.
Keeping your commitments, right?
Keeping your word and your commitments.
And with being in integrity with yourself, it's just about basically doing that same thing.
Doing that same thing, but
with
only
yourself.
With your own values.
And with your value system.
Your values and your beliefs. And that's where boundaries come into play, is when those things are violated, right? Your values are something that's important to you.
Yeah.
And when they're violated, when somebody violates them, then we get upset. We get angry.
Yeah.
Right?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you've really helped me with is viewing the idea of being in integrity with yourself, with others, as more of a binary, right? I think there's a lot of people in this world, and I've been one of them.
What do you mean by binary?
Binary meaning it's just sort of one way or the other. You're not kind of in integrity, right?
Okay.
I didn't kind of show up on time. I didn't kind of violate your trust, right? I either did or I didn't, right? And that was eye-opening for me, because a lot of my life, well, let's be honest, we're not, I personally haven't been running around with a huge example or sample size of people who are exemplifying that on a regular basis, right? So if what you've been exposed to is people kind of just half honoring commitments, then you sort of rise to that expectation, right? Whereas going through this more so with you, I'm realizing, okay, no, it's black and white. You either kept your word or you didn't. You showed up on time or you didn't, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
You completed a job or you didn't.
Yeah.
You take care of yourself or you're not.
And so why do you think that is a value that isn't seen that way so much in society? Because I'm sure anybody here...
Because we're human, and it's easy to be lazy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So think about people who work out regularly, right? And consistently, and their bodies show, right? So they're committed to doing that. They're probably committed to eating appropriately. And so they're honoring themselves by doing that.
Yeah.
but it's painful. It's painful. They're doing something different. They're making a conscious effort to do something that's difficult. So you do cold plunges. I do cold plunges. Why do we do cold plunges?
That's
Right?
a great question. I wonder
Right?
sometimes.
It's difficult. It's challenging. It's hard, but you're making a decision to do something that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that is because, going back to the character thing, growth is a value that's important to me.
Right.
I've never needed to be the best at anything. I'm competitive, so there's an element of that, but what's always been most important to me is just, am I moving the needle?
Right.
Right? Part of why I love
Right.
strength training.
Why do you get up in the middle of the night and change your kid's diaper when they needed to be changed? Why do you do that? Why do you get up in the middle of the night and check on them?
Yeah.
Why do you do that?
'Cause I love my kids.
Because you love your kids, right?
And somebody's got to do it, right?
They're
not going to do it themselves.
They're not going to do it themselves because you love them. But even though it's painful, even though you don't want to get up,
Yeah.
right? You still do it.
Yeah. That's a perfect.
Because it's part of your responsibility. It's part of your job to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a perfect segue into the next point in this kind of understanding integrity segment. Why is integrity essential for personal growth and relationships?
Well, for relationships, it fosters and builds trust. And the thing that I found, my wife and I will have been married 43 years this summer.
Congratulations.
And my relationship with her is better. We're more in love with each other now than we were when we were young, when we were 24 on our first date, right? And
That's awesome.
because we've had all this life together, we've grown together, but I am unreasonably honest with her. I tell her things when I don't want to tell her.
Yeah.
I tell her things that are going on with me so she understands where I'm at. And you know what's happened?
What?
She's telling me things that I never knew about her.
How about that?
How about that?
After.
Right. Being radically honest with somebody and telling somebody that you're living with what's going on with you, that's taking a risk and trusting that they're going to hold you safe. And then when they hold you safe, what does that do? That goes, wow, that felt so great and that's so cool and I feel so good. I'll do it again. I'll take the risk and do it again.
Yeah.
Right? And she'll do the same thing. And in that process, your character grows, your integrity grows, your commitment to each other grows.
Yeah. Yeah, because in some ways, in that particular instance, you've shared something very personal to you.
Right.
You took that risk, right?
Right.
And it's almost like, if you've already made that investment, right? It only goes from there.
Right. And when you're in an interpersonal relationship, there's boundaries with other people. You don't want to share everything that's going on with you. But when you're in that interpersonal relationship, that's real intimacy.
Yeah.
When I can hold you and you can hold me.
Yeah.
And we're together. We have a little key word in our relationship. It's cheddar.
Yeah.
Because one of the kids,
Cheddar.
Because one of our kids, when they were young, they hug us and say cheddar. It's like we have each other.
Yeah. Oh, right? Cheddar. I like it.
So
That's cute.
we say cheddar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And it's really special.
Yeah. That's a beautiful thing, and it again, ever since we've been working through these things together, to cheddar.
Cheddar. Right.
I've experienced that with my own wife.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the men's groups, that we used to be a part of, right? One of the exercises on their weekend retreats is that black T-shirt exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of the truth I don't want you to know about me is.
Right.
And in my experience, that is kind of a big defining moment where the weekend shifts a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
because how could it not when people are just standing up in front of the others telling secrets, right? Things that they wouldn't tell people, right? Wouldn't tell coworkers, friends. Keep it close to the chest, right? And similarly, when I experienced that, one of the first things I did is I went home and to my wife and I said, here's some things I tell just about no one else but me, right? And God. That's about it, right? And again, same thing. I did that. She opened up to me about things that she really has kept for just her. And as you said, it was an incredible shift in our relationship.
Right.
Right. And it's not like that was one and done, right? You have to continue to nurture
Continue
that.
to do that.
But it's an amazing shift, that's for sure. Yeah, I wish this was a 2-hour podcast because there's so much good stuff to get into. So the next topic here, kind of diving a little bit more into integrity with others. So keeping your word and honoring agreements. What would be, that sounds so basic, right? But where do you feel that people go off the rails with that? And what would be maybe an actionable tip?
There's a couple different things. First, you have to have a clear agreement.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
How many times have you talked to somebody out on the floor and you think they understand what you just said, and you go and watch them and they don't have any idea?
Yeah.
Why do you think that, in the airline industry and flying aircrafts, it doesn't matter what it is, when the controller gives an instruction, the pilot repeats the instruction back to the controller, and they say, Roger. So they both know that the message has been delivered, and the pilot knows the instructions. The controller knows what's going on. If they got a mayday, right? Yeah. They understand completely what has to happen next.
Yeah.
So that's the first step, right?
And that's such a great point, because ever since, again, I've been exposed to this, it's crazy how much of the time people have disagreements. And when you really look at the facts, no, they agreed to something they thought was this, and you agreed to something you thought was that. And really, you're both at fault for not communicating that.
So we had one the other day when I texted you and said, I thought you were sending me the outline by Tuesday night.
Yeah.
And you texted me back and said, I said Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I went, oh, somehow I missed the Wednesday part of it. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you sent it to me in the afternoon. So we're fine. But that was a very simple thing that I missed, and you didn't clarify that I understood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
that
really,
it was one or two, right? And it's easy to do.
And this particular concept of being clear on agreements has helped me be such a better boss at work, supervisor at work, because it's given me so many growth opportunities where in the past someone didn't meet an expectation I had, and I'd be frustrated about that. But since I started delving more into this, I'd look at that, kind of go autopsy on the situation, and go, wait a minute, I never did really clarify what my expectations were. I gave general expectations, but how can I be mad at someone for not doing something that I didn't explicitly say they should do?
Right.
And that's just removed so much of the emotional piece of it from me with these scenarios, and helped me figure out with particular people, how can I communicate better? It's the same thing with training, right? And that's even probably more so than just working with my guys, right? It's just, hey, are we both clear on what it is you're working towards, right? Anyways, I could go on.
Okay. So you want another tip on?
Yeah, like an actionable
item. So for me, it's self-reflection. So I think about this, in a situation where there's been, I feel a boundary crossed, or somebody didn't live up to, their my expectations, or I didn't live up to somebody else's expectations. Self-reflection. And I didn't know what I was doing, but when my kids were little, or not little, but when they were teenagers and they'd get in trouble and I'd bring them home and sit them down at the kitchen table, I wouldn't ground them. I wouldn't spank them. I wouldn't fine them. My dad fined me. But what I would do is 2 questions. And to this day, they say, Dad, anything but the 2 questions. You could beat us, but not the 2 questions.
Yeah.
And so the first question is, what did you learn? And we would sit there. Imagine a junior high kid or a high school kid sitting there when their dad asks them, what did you learn? And they know that they're not leaving until they tell me a reasonable answer. And I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Just get a blank look.
And so when they'd come up with what they learned, I would tell them, okay, now let's rewind back to before this incident. And what would you do or do differently? And that is the key question, because it sets you up for actually stepping back and looking at the situation from a disassociated position and looking at where the pattern started and looking at where the pattern ended and go, oh, if I only knew what was going to happen here, then I would change my behavior. And that's where learning takes place.
Yeah.
So I do that consistently all the time. It's something that just runs in my brain all the time because I've made it a habit.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how I did it. I just started doing it.
It's just something that eventually
Yeah, it's just something
came
that
out of the ether for you.
Came out of who knows where, right?
Now, your kids say, hey, not the 2 questions, but in hindsight, how do they feel about it as they've evolved as
Well, they know the
adulthood?
value, and when I see them as adults, they ask me questions about things sometimes, but they really run their lives. And I think that scenario really helped them to formulate making decisions for themselves.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing at the time, right?
Yeah.
But it was something that I came up with, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure somebody else is doing it too somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
But it's what I decided to do, and it's been very effective for them. They're all self-sufficient, independent, doing great human beings, adults in the world. And that's what I always wanted for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the actionable item in terms of being kind of self-reflecting is, what did you learn from this? And if you could go back in time, what would you do
What
differently?
would you do or do differently? But then in the process of doing that, looking at, what, if you had a situation, what values were violated? Because when our values are violated, that's what gets us upset,
Yeah.
right? Something that's important to us gets violated. We get pissed.
Yeah.
And usually, a lot of times with people, as they start arguing about something, and the other person they're arguing with about it, they never truly listen. So the situation will continue to escalate until married people will separate from each other. And if the pattern keeps on going, then their relationship goes into chaos. Then eventually the relationship drops off. They become angry and resentful. Do you think people are angry and resentful with each other? They're going to become intimate with each other? No, they don't trust each other.
Yeah.
They're usually both out of integrity.
Yeah.
With each other and themselves.
But this is a great segue into the last point of this, again, this integrity with others portion of the section is, what do you do when integrity is broken and to repair trust and move forward?
Well, first, you have to take responsibility for what you've done and then atone, make amends, right? What can you do to show the person that you're sorry? And then do your best to not step in the pile again, right?
Yeah.
But we all do.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to understand that. One of the things that, in the men's group that we were in, that I would tell men that were there, because they'd go to a weekend and then they'd feel great about what they learned about themselves. But we tell them, you're going home to your wife. And as you walk in the door, you feel great. But they see the same guy that left on Friday, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm different.
I've changed. I'm enlightened now, right? And what happens is it takes time and number of examples for somebody to start trusting you again,
Yeah.
right? So how many times have wives said to men, please, can you take out the garbage? And the man goes, yes, I will do that, and doesn't move. And then he fully intends to do it, but then he forgets, right? And then his wife asks him again. And it's probably not an isolated incident. There's probably other things going on where he is also behaving the same way and not following through.
Yeah.
What do you think happens to her on the inside, right?
Yeah.
She's just asking, she's doing all this stuff. She's just asking a simple thing.
Yeah.
And he's not responding to her. So in turn, she gets upset. She goes, he doesn't care about me. If he respected me, you can just imagine where that goes, right?
Yeah.
It spirals downhill really fast.
Yeah. And that's a sinister one because it's so innocent to say, I forgot, right? Like it's almost this pass.
But that gets the bullshit card.
That gets the bullshit card. But I think that's probably a sort of a get out of jail free card a lot of people give themselves on violating integrity is the I forgot.
The other person never forgets.
Yeah.
Never forgets that.
Yeah.
Right? The person who said it forgot it because they'll repeat it, they'll do it again.
Yeah.
Right? But the way to resolve it is really, really simple. Make an agreement. If you can't go and grab the garbage right now and take it out, say, I'm doing this right now. I will do it in 10 minutes, right? Or whatever the agreement is. And then by God, you better fulfill that, right?
Yeah.
You better fulfill that agreement and that promise that you made, even that simple, tiny promise that you made, and make it happen.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how many times and numbers of examples will she see this behavior has changed? When the first time she's not going to, she goes, well, he did it this time, but there's no guarantee that he's going to do it again, right? It might take a week. It might take a month, depending on where the relationship is. It might take 6 months. Who knows how long it's going to take?
Yeah.
But it's going to take a certain amount of time and number of examples to correct that.
Yeah.
And then what will happen is all of a sudden she'll go, oh my God, he's changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happens is then she changes. And now she wants to do more for him. So where does it start? It starts with the person who's going to begin to resolve the conflict and the lies in the relationship. How many times do people lie to themselves during the day?
Probably all the time.
All the time.
And that's one over the years. I've had some close friends who, through conversation, I've come to realize by their own admission that they lie to themselves. And it's very difficult to deal with someone who lies to themselves because basically anything's on the table, right? If you're willing to lie to yourself, then basically anything can happen from there because I don't know what rules we're playing by.
Right.
Right? Like if you just kind of change the rules as you go because you're operating in your own world, there's really no basis for moving forward. And that's an extremely frustrating place to be.
So how many times does this happen? Where you see somebody and they say, well, how are you doing today? And are there times where you're not doing well? And you say, I'm good.
Yeah.
That's a lie.
It's a lie.
That's a lie. And even that little tiny lie, every time you lie, that takes out part of your soul. It damages part of your integrity. So when people do that to me, thank you for asking. If I'm not having a good day, and I don't want to lie and say I'm good, right? thank you for asking. How are you?
Yeah.
Because why are people asking that?
Yeah.
They're asking it to make a connection.
Yeah.
Right?
Or just be polite.
Or just be polite. So you don't have, there's no obligation to answer.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
Right? How are you?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm telling you, it'll fly right past them.
It's my buddy CJ's birthday, and we had this funny time where we were shopping when I was visiting him, and he lives in Minneapolis. And one of the girls working at the store, I asked her how she was doing, and she goes, "Peachy." And I go, "You seem like someone who would be peachy." and then she kind of opened up after that and told me about, her day sucked, basically.
So I even said this.
Yeah.
I said, well, if I really tell you how I feel, you're going to be really sorry that you asked.
Yeah, that's great. It's like, do you really want to know?
And that shuts everything down.
Yeah. No,
That's I don't really want to talk to you right now.
Yeah. That's awesome. So moving on to integrity with oneself. So how self-integrity builds confidence and peace.
Confidence and peace. Okay. So this, sticking with your commitments, telling the truth, living up to your obligations, even when it's painful to do, because oftentimes it's painful, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to do this. Like, for example, yesterday afternoon, Wednesdays are my days to work out, 4:00 in the afternoon, right? I leave. I'm gone for 2 hours. I got this outline to think about this yesterday at, I think, a little after 2. So I knew I wanted to do some work on it, but I would have taken over 2 hours out of my afternoon to go and work to honor that commitment. I would have felt stressed the whole time I was there thinking about what I was supposed to be doing here. I wanted to live up to my commitment to you. So I adjusted to, I'm giving this up to do this, to fulfill this commitment. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? I made a decision about what was best for me and the whole system, right, to do. So you can adjust. I could have gone and worked out, and then I'd come here and might not be as prepared as I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to let you down.
Yeah, but you decided for yourself.
I decided
how to best handle the situation,
Best
which
handle
is
the
how,
situation.
which is where you can get that peace, right? Is you find the ways to honor the varying agreements you have,
Right.
And sometimes, as you said, modifications may be necessary.
Right. So there's a fellow that I work with, right? And I get I'm a lot better at not getting mad with him, but he's out of integrity all the
You don't want to
time.
make John mad.
No, there's a lot of ugliness on the other side of that. My kids used to call it my hammerhead face.
Hammerhead face. That's
whatever
awesome.
that means,
That's
right?
awesome.
You don't want to be you don't want to experience that, right? But we'd have situations where he wouldn't pay a vendor, or the vendor wasn't shipping anymore because he hasn't paid and he's taken new orders, right? And then these people need it right away and we can't ship it, right? It's like, and I have to lie to the customer.
Yeah.
And take the order. It's a lie. And I eventually had to tell him, I am not going to do this. If you want to do it, you do it, but I am not doing this. I'm not lying to the customer.
Yeah.
It's wrong. So when your values are crossed, then you're at a choice point to decide what you're going to do about them crossing the boundary. And sometimes balancing that out is difficult. It's taken me, I'm going to be leaving, my current position and going back to coaching and starting a coaching practice here soon. And I'm probably leaving in June, which is only a couple of months away. But it's taken me a while because I've had to balance out. I got this income. I got to take care of my wife. I got other responsibilities. I got to formulate a plan. So now I've formulated a plan on how I'm going to proceed. And now I can proceed.
Yeah.
So sometimes it isn't resolved in a moment, right? It's resolved through time. Our life plays out through time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I think, but to your point, even if you have to just sort of delay that gratification,
Right.
you have a plan,
I'm
right? And
working
you can put
towards,
some faith in that plan.
whatever this is, right? I'm
Yeah.
working towards it.
That's something that has helped me a lot with dealing with anxiety is every once in a while when I have these recurring thoughts that I have difficulty processing. Well, one, I like to write down what I'm experiencing and how it's making me feel. But after I do that, what can I do about it? What can I action on? And just the process of sometimes just saying, oh, I'm worried about that thing. It's like, oh, well, I'm going to do this. Right? And that's my plan. I'm taking back some of that control to say, hey, here's what I'm going to do. And there's peace in that. And maybe I need to go back and do something different.
Well,
Maybe
just
I got to go back to the drawing
writing
boards.
it down that's not my way of doing it, but that's a good way of doing it. Journaling and writing it down, so because it disassociates whatever you're thinking onto the paper away from you, so it's not inside you.
But in terms of anxiety, that could be beneficial to disassociate from it.
Yes.
Right? The role of boundaries is the last point here, and you just started kind of segueing into that, right? So why are boundaries necessary for maintaining integrity? And maybe it'd be important to define boundaries first.
So think about this. Our boundaries, we have our body, right? Our skin is a boundary, right? So if I step across and punch you, I'm crossing a boundary, right?
Yeah. Please don't.
So sometimes lean forward like this, right? Sometimes ladies, I'll give them a pat on the back. I say,
Yeah.
And I'll ask permission. Can I touch your shoulder? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you lean forward, right? And I pat them on the back. I go,
Yeah.
there's your pat on the back for the day. And they go, oh my God. I said, when was the last time you got that? They go, never.
Yeah.
Right? I love it, right? So, but I ask permission before I cross, right?
Yeah.
So what was the question again?
I was saying, why are boundaries necessary for maintaining integrity, but then also saying it's probably important to define what boundaries are for people.
So boundaries are our physical space, right? So think of your house. You got a front yard and you put a fence in the front yard and there's a gate on the fence. The fence and the gate are for keeping the good stuff in and the bad stuff out.
Yeah.
Right? So that's that's the definition of a boundary, right?
Yeah.
Now, people cross boundaries into everybody's spaces in many, many different ways. And like I said before, okay, so our beliefs give us permission to behave. And behavior is always connected to a value or an action or something. So when we're doing something, we're either doing something that's in synchrony with somebody else or thing or work, or we're not.
Yeah.
Right? And when we're not, when somebody's violating a boundary of ours, then it's important to think about what you want to do about it, right? I'll give you an example. I had a friend of mine from high school the other day text me, and he said, what are you doing on Saturday? Kind of an interesting question.
Yeah.
I know him really well. I know he's narcissistic and an alcoholic, right? So I said, I have plans. And that's the way I left it. He didn't ask me, I'm having people over on Saturday afternoon. Would you like to come? It was a trap question, right? It was a trap, right? So I recognize the trap and I don't play into the trap, right? So later on, like a day or so later, he goes, well, so I also said, well, what are you doing? And he responded, well, we're gathering on the porch. Well, I know what that means. He's going to be sitting on the porch, and whoever else is there, they're going to be smoking and drinking, right? I don't really want to be a part of that. I don't drink.
Yeah.
I don't smoke. It's not going to be a good time for me.
Probably
It's going to be a waste of my time.
Yeah.
So he is actually someone that I don't associate with anymore because he's not the kind of person that I want to be with. So being with people that are going to bring you up instead of bring you down.
Yeah. And that's a very difficult thing for people, right? Is you build up these friendships. Sometimes it's just based on longevity. You know, we have these relationships where when you really reflect on it, you go, why am I friends with this person? I guess because I always have been, right? You know, whereas maybe if you met today, it might be a different story.
And what
right?
is your most valuable commodity?
Your time.
Your time. You can only spend it.
It's true.
You know, and I'm 70 years old. I might have 20 years left. You know, it's like every day is really important. Every afternoon's really important. How many Saturdays am I going to have for the rest of my life, right?
It's kind of like it touches on why people occasionally will make jokes about people getting older and being kind of like the crotchety old man, right? But really there's sort of some wisdom there because that man or woman is aware of the fact that, hey, my time is precious, more aware than someone who's 20.
Right.
And
Right.
they're not maybe as concerned about niceties or hurting feelings if it's just about, you know, if they have that opportunity to be true to themselves and do something they really want to do.
Right. Right. So, you know, I said, I'm busy.
Yeah.
You know, Saturday afternoon is probably going to be a day that I do something for myself.
Yeah.
Go for a walk, read a book, you know.
And I love hearing you say that because this is something that I think is really important in my realm, right? You know, we at Nico, we have clients who, especially I notice with women who have children, it's probably the most I notice this, is sometimes it's very difficult for them to advocate for themselves, right? Like the idea of just taking time for themselves to work out, it's somehow ingrained that it's selfish, right? Like you're sitting here and I go, I want to be with myself Saturday. I have these things I want to do. And that's your prerogative, right?
My choice.
There's nothing
My life.
wrong about that, right? And so what sort of...
So in that question, where you're talking about ladies who give, right?
Yeah.
That's the other boundary. We have the boundary where people cross into our space, and there's a boundary violation when we cross into everybody else's space. And I call it the helping sickness. You know, people unsolicitedly, you know, try to help or support one another or do things for their kids that their kids are fully capable of doing, right? It's like, no, you're crossing a boundary. And what you're doing is you're not giving them the opportunity to learn and take responsibility for themselves. You're actually stifling them, you know?
That's so true.
So you have to, if do you want help? You know, if I see somebody struggling, I might say, do you need help?
Yeah.
Right? And watch, right? If they say, no, I got it, right? What would happen if I stepped into that space? They would be upset,
Yeah.
right? Or I could say, well, if you decide you need help, let me know.
Yeah. That's a very important point, I think, for a lot of people to hear because, again, I think oftentimes it's this idea, oh, I want to be helpful, I want to be nice, but really, if, as you mentioned earlier, that may not be what that person really needs.
Denying them the opportunity to take responsibility for themselves, right?
It's interesting. I was talking with a client yesterday about when someone thinks about sort of an abusive father, pretty quickly things come to mind of like getting whoopings, right? Alcoholic dad, right? Or the dad who's never there. But people don't often talk as much about this sort of abusive mom. And in my experience, or just what I've observed with people, I think one of the most scary forms of that for moms is that I'm never going to let my son grow up, right? We've seen that here where...
Right, I've seen it too.
Where it's you have a 24-year-old kid man who their mom still wants to come in here, sign them up for training, talk for them. And it's heartbreaking because on one end there's love there, but it's you said.
You think there's love there.
Well, it's maybe more self-love because it's like rather than letting them grow and fly, it's
not about the kid, it's about themselves.
Yeah.
Their identity is attached to their kid. right? And as far as I'm concerned, because I've seen that plenty of times, especially when I was teaching Hapkido, that is one of the greatest sins a parent can do to their child, is to make them that inept, right? That is just, that pisses me off,
Yeah.
makes me angry.
Yeah, because there will be a world without them someday. And then what do you do?
Correct.
You're
You're correct. Now, there's an exception to that. And my brother, who's mentally handicapped, who lives in a home, right?
Sure.
The greatest fear that their parents have, right? The parents are in their 80s, their kids are in their 60s, is what's going to happen to their kid when they die? Because they know they're going to die before their child dies.
Yeah.
What's going to happen to them? That's their greatest fear.
Yeah.
So those people need to be taken care of.
Yeah.
Because they can't take care of
Yeah,
themselves.
there's an exception there.
That's an exception for sure. But I'm sorry. I have no tolerance for that.
Yeah. Watch out. So, John, I seriously, I could just go on and on about this. I love these topics. I think they're extremely important. So, what do you think would be key takeaways for listeners, right? When they're really trying to make sense of all this, because we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about integrity with oneself, with others, boundaries.
I would start with self. And really self-reflect on the things that you're doing and how you're behaving. Not only the actions that you're taking, but the things you're saying to yourself. Are you lying to yourself? You know, when somebody says, "How you doing?" do you just go, "Good," right? And usually there's always an emotion that's elicited when we're out of integrity with ourselves. There's some kind of emotion and feeling.
Yeah.
And that can be your radar, your indicator as to whether you're in integrity or out of integrity, right? If you get angry, if you get upset, if you feel like shit, it all comes through the body, right? You know.
Your conscience.
And then you have to go back to the two questions, right? What did I learn? And what do I need to do and do differently?
Yeah.
Right? And formulate a plan. Right?
I think that's a perfect way to end it.
Okay.
John, thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.